It's another edition of This Week in Hockey East with Eric Gallanty. I'm Tyler Murray, getting set for an exciting slate of games again around the league. We got our first Hockey East game of the week on NESN, a big non-conference showdown in women's hockey. Then the Michigan Wolverines are coming to Amherst after a split with Providence, and then an intriguing matchup between the Eagles and UConn Huskies in women's Hockey East. But first, Eric, this week begins another year of the long-standing broadcast partnership between Hockey East and NESN.
Yeah, it's so exciting when it begins every single year, and it'll start tonight in what should be a really great game that you and Jim Connolly will be at. But 37 games announced as part of the Hockey East slate on NESN between the men's side and the women's side. But we're going to have expanded playoff coverage, more coverage that we're going to announce as the year goes on. There's even some plans in the works for maybe some whip around coverage on the final game of the regular season at the end of the year. We're so excited for a lot of different things to come, a lot to talk about. We're going to structure our show around some of those games of the weeks as we preview each week in Hockey East. And as we said, it starts tonight. You talk about BU having to go into some tough barns to begin the building, right? I don't think we're going to see anything less than a sold out crowd when BU heads up to UNH. You'll be there. What excites you about this game?
I mean, yes, first and foremost, the atmosphere that the fans can bring to the Whittemore Center in Durham, New Hampshire, that's always a blast. And, number one BU, they stay number one, surviving a scare with the overtime game-winning goal from Lane Hudson at Bentley last weekend. But if you want more on BU, we took a deep dive on the Terriers on the YouTube page for Hockey East. You can see episode 1 of This Week in Hockey East, so for plenty of Terrier breakdowns there. But for UNH, it's a team that averaged just 2 goals a game last year. It was well documented how much they struggled in the first half of the season. But I think one of the more underrated stories about UNH last season was just how well they turned things around in the 2023 part of the year. They went 7-2 once the calendar turned to the new year. And they lost a couple heading into the playoffs, but the only reason their season ended was a 2-1 overtime loss to Providence on the road in the first round of the playoffs. The very next week, Providence did that same thing against Northeastern in overtime win, and they almost beat BU in overtime in the Hockey East semifinals. So nothing to be ashamed about how things ended for UNH. The concern is when you're struggling offensively, you don't have your captain Chase Stevenson anymore to just feed the puck to and make things happen. He's a grad transfer to Merrimack, of course, this year. So maybe leaning on some sophomores I'm keeping an eye on this year. Cy LeClaire, who's hockey royalty in Durham, 2 goals against BU last year in his freshman campaign. That was a 6-3 Terrier win, but LeClaire actually tied the game at 3. And then Steven Sardarian. Okay, this is the Sabres' 3rd-round draft pick from Russia. A slow start to his freshman year. Didn't score a point until his 19th game. But remember, Sardarian arrived a little bit late. There was a language barrier. It took him a while to get settled. Mike Souza talked about this a lot last year. But his confidence really grew in the 2-game series in Durham against Maine last year. He scored the shootout winning goal in front of a sold-out fan base at the Witt. And then, first time they get to see him this year in that exhibition against the Black Bears last weekend, Sardarian gets a goal and an assist. So he feels like a really confident player. Again, one of the higher draft picks, Sabres 3rd-round selection, Steven Sardarian. So keeping an eye on him to see if they can keep pace with what should be a really electric BU offense this year.
Yeah, and you talk about the BU side of things. You mentioned the game-winning goal by Lane Hudson. It's going to be really interesting to see how BU bounces back, right? It's just one game at Bentley. And the thing that happens when you're the number 1 team in the nation and when your name starts with Boston and ends in University, you're going to get everyone's best shot. And especially with a couple of games on the road to start the season, it's really interesting to see. Again, we talked about last week how much BU does bring back, right? It's not your traditional youth in terms of a talent-laden team that we've seen with some of these other high recruiting classes across the country. But still, these are tough atmospheres. And for UNH, just as you mentioned, can you get out to a faster start this year after just a little bit more experience coming back than you had the year prior? That's going to be so much fun to watch Friday night.
Now, Eric, you're going to break down a couple of great women's hockey matchups for us. Let's get started with Providence and Quinnipiac in a marquee matchup.
Yeah, that's going to be 3 o'clock on NESN on Saturday. So continuing our NESN slate. And, Providence, we told you on the show the difficulty of some of these ECAC teams. ECAC has been just ridiculously good to begin the season. They are 24-4-1 to begin the year against non-conference teams. They've just been unbelievable. And the challenge now for Hockey East, we talk about it on the men's side, we talk about it on the women's side, trying to pick off some of these non-conference games. Another chance for Providence. Remember last year, Providence was a really good defensive team. They were top 15 in the country in terms of their defense. So I don't think you're going to see many games of them allowing 7 goals, but they do have a new goalkeeper to try to replace in Sandra Abstrader, who played so much for Providence over the last couple of years. So how do they work in some of those new pieces in goal? It was much better defensively on Saturday. It ended up being just 1 goal allowed plus the empty netter by Providence. So how do they bounce back from that? Mireille Kingsley got the start on Saturday. She was pretty good in that game, made 20 saves. Does she get another nod here against Quinnipiac, who's 4-0 to begin the season, wins against New Hampshire and Maine to start the year? And again, can Hockey East try to pick off some of these games against the ECAC? That should be fascinating. Again, that's 3 o'clock on Nesson coming up on Saturday. Speaking of the non-conference theme, let's keep it rolling. One of the positives last week in Hockey East was the fact that on the men's side, how about a 7-2-1 non-conference record last week? Some really big victories. We talked about Providence going up to Michigan. We talked about Boston College going to Quinnipiac. Michigan now is coming east to take on UMass, Tyler.
Yeah, really exciting matchup at the Mullins Center in Amherst. ESPN Plus for both of these games, Friday and Saturday. For UMass, Greg Carvel has said as recently as last week that last year the Minutemen weren't as unified as they needed to be, not as together as they had been in his first few successful years. So he's trying to get back to a team chemistry where guys, in his words, are excited to play hard for each other. And so the first thing you think of, who are the captains this year? Who's going to lead this team? Ryan Ufko and Aaron Bollinger. And it just reminds you, and UMass fans don't need a history lesson on this, but when you are led by dynamic two-way blue liners, amazing things happen for the Minutemen. You go back to their breakout year, Mario Ferraro, Cale Makar, first time they make it to the Frozen Four. A couple of years later, Mark Del Gaizo, Zach Jones, and they're national champions. So you're hoping that Ufko and Bollinger can work their way into those history books. Now, Ryan Ufko, by all accounts, the consummate pro. How much do we talk about Scott Morrow the last couple of years? For good reason. He's an incredible player. He's going to score so many goals in the NHL once he gets there. But Ryan Ufko has just been right next to him, grinding away, maybe one of the more overlooked talents in the entire league. So that's long-term. But short-term for UMass, they were able to build and hold a lead against AIC last week, and their coaching staff has admitted that that didn't happen nearly enough last year. There were a lot of leads that kind of slipped away. So you look at Michigan, an interesting split against Providence. The Friars went down 1-0 on Saturday, and then Providence scored 4 unanswered goals to win that opener. Then on Sunday, Providence, they looked like they were buried, down 5-1 in the third. Then they scored 3 goals unanswered to make a real game out of it. So Michigan, we know it's a team that can score, but they're going to give up goals in bunches, at least from what we saw in that first weekend. So who's going to eliminate those really rough moments? Yeah, you're going to give up a goal, but can you not make it 2 goals? Can you not make it 3 goals, which is really what did UMass in toward the end of last season. So excited to see that one. And you look at, we talked about it last week, another crazy competitive non-conference opening weekend or opening 2 weeks for UMass as they continue to load things up before conference play begins.
Greg Carvel certainly never been afraid to schedule difficult at the beginning of this season, and he's got another one that should be a lot of fun. You know, I'm really interested as kind of a last point before we get to some short shifts. We talked about on the women's side Northeastern so much. They've been the class of the league for the long time. We know that. I want to know who's number 2 early in the season. Who's in that second spot? We talked about Providence a little bit earlier. Vermont, who was picked second in the Hockey East preseason poll. They have another tough challenge in the non-conference against St. Lawrence this weekend. But how about UConn, who has the most impressive results, maybe outside of Northeastern so far? They played a ranked Penn State team 2 weeks ago now, a win and a tie on the road. That certainly stands out. Now they're in Hockey East play. They will play a home-and-home with Boston College this weekend. Tia Chan, it's early in the season. We know that. But number 1 in goals against average, number 1 in saves percentage for someone who was already a third-team Hockey East All-Star last year. Can UConn continue the momentum, maybe even put up a statement this weekend to say, hey, we have a chance to be that number 2 team competing with Northeastern? Obviously, it's a long year. Obviously, it's only October. We know that. But an interesting challenge for UConn to try to continue the momentum that they built against Penn State, against a Boston College team that's finally returning home after a really tough start to the non-conference schedule, going on the road and playing some ranked teams. I'm really interested to see how UConn fares this weekend against BC.
All right, let's do some short shifts. Final thoughts before we sign off here. I'm going to sneak one in here before you go. Okay, Northeastern, they had their first game of the post Devin Levi era, maybe the most irreplaceable player in the league, but I'm sure they were heartened to see Vegas draft pick Cameron Whitehead, a 13-save shutout, big win over Stonehill, 7-0. Okay, you're supposed to win that game, but I mean, if that goes in the other direction, you start to get a little bit nervous. But Whitehead, the Hockey East Pro Ambitions Rookie of the Week, so good vibes there, at least to start things in the post Devin Levi era for Northeastern.
Tyler, how about Merrimack finally kicking off their season? And again, what's been our theme the last couple of weeks? Are we looking at pairwise yet? No, of course not. It's October. But are we looking at how games might affect the pairwise down the line? For sure. That's what you come here for on This Week in Hockey East. And again, a hard trip for Merrimack here, going on the road in the non-conference to take on Arizona State. The non-conference record for the conference as a whole is so important for establishing where the placement of these conferences are going to be, where the bonus points come in. We don't need to do the whole breakdown of the pairwise, but it matters as the year goes on. So these are two really important ones. Plus, it's just exciting to see a Merrimack team that had a magical season last year, brings almost everybody back, was pretty highly respected, I thought, in the preseason poll, being picked third by the coaches. How's Merrimack going to follow last year up? It's going to be so much fun to see.
And then the tally we always love to update, 73 Hockey East alums this year on NHL rosters. So 31 of the 32 teams have at least one Hockey East alum. And every Hockey East program has at least one player in the NHL this year, which is believed to be a first-time occurrence. So always fun to watch former Hockey East players make it happen at the highest level of the game. You got one more for us, Eric?
I got one more, and can I expand outside a little bit? Obviously, we're talking about Hockey East, but who's the top of Hockey East right now? Boston University, the number 1 team in the country. Boston College, the number 4 team in the country. Does it feel like the 90s again, Tyler? Does it feel like, I mean, you take the top 8 teams in the country right now. You hear some of these blue blood names: BU, Minnesota, Denver, BC, Michigan. Let's take Quinnipiac out for a second. They've obviously established themselves as a blue blood of late, right? The last decade, certainly. But even throw Michigan State in there. North Dakota's number 7 right now. So 7 of those 8 teams in the top 8 right now. These are the absolute blue bloods of the sport. You want to go back from 1995 to 2010. Of the 16 national championships in that sequence, 14 of them from the 7 teams that we just listed. They're all back in the top 8. It's going to be fascinating to see. Is this a rise of the blue blood programs once again? And how do they compete against some of the, let's just say, new kids on the block, right? Quinnipiac's been around a long time. Some others right in there as well. But it's really interesting to see some of these classic Hockey East and Big Ten programs now, and even out in the NCHC with North Dakota and Denver, the blue bloods of the sport rising their way back up to the top.
It was fun to get college hockey back the last couple of weeks. Feels like this weekend, though, we can finally sink our teeth in to the real start of the 2023-24 Hockey East season. Should be a lot of fun. We'll see you next week.